Good morning, everybody. I promised you all that when I completed this portrait, I would show it to you. So here it is. Completed portrait of the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak. My namesake. So there you go. I kept my promise. My name is Fitzraven, and we are right now in the week getting ready for Pesach, which is a hectic week, a burdensome week, a week filled with preparation for the upcoming holiday, holy work. So I'm going to keep this video short today. The background for this teaching is as follows. The previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, was a 24-year-old man in 1905, January, February 1905. And he had a series of correspondence of letters between him and an uncle of his, Reb Menachem Mendel Schneerson. This uncle of his was actually 38 years old at the time of the letter that we'll look at. So 13 years older than him. This was his father's youngest brother. And Reb Menachem Mendel, around this time, around 1905, needed to move and to spend time in Paris, France. He was quite overburdened with responsibilities, overwhelmed, and the circumstances warranted him to take a break, to move away, and he was spending time in Paris. And while he was there, he was depressed. He felt lonely, and he was very much attached to his internal state, his internal dialogue. It seems like he had a lot of obsessive thoughts, just ruminating, sulking, feeling down, disconnected, pessimistic, apathetic. And he was in correspondence with his nephew, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, who would later become the previous Lubavitcher Rebbe, the Frierdiker Rebbe. And the Frierdiker Rebbe was guiding him and encouraging him. And the letters are absolutely fascinating. I invite anyone to take a look and study them. They can be found in the Igros Kodesh of the Frierdiker Rebbe, volume 13. Like Yud Gimel. So within the context of this dialogue going back and forth between the nephew, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, the uncle, Reb Menachem Mendel, the Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak assures him a little bit, some time before Purim, that he was going to be creating a special run of butter, as well as schmaltz, and preparing it for Pesach, and that he would send it to Paris for his uncle to avail himself of over the Yom Tov of Pesach. Now, this is what he told him a few weeks before Purim. At Tainus Esther, the day before Purim, 1905, the Frierdiker Rebbe writes a letter to his uncle. It's a long letter. And in there, he also includes an update. And the update includes him filling him in on the status of the butter and the schmaltz that he's going to send him for Pesach. Apparently, Reb Menachem Mendel, his uncle, had expressed to the nephew, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, something like, about the butter and the schmaltz, forget about it, who needs it anyway? Something like that. He was kind of waving it, dismissing it as if he didn't care for it, as if he didn't want it. And on the surface, that could seem like noble or virtuous, that he was okay with less. He had no need to indulge in these extras, butter, schmaltz, etc. But the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak, catches this and calls him out on it. He actually calls him out on it. And here's what he says. Now I'm going to respond, dear uncle, to your letter in the order of your particular questions. Hashmura nishlacha esmail ala de hapost. The shmura matzah was sent off to you yesterday in the mail. V'chema v'shuman, the butter and the schmaltz, eshlachem irtashem in b'yem dalad haba b'yem alaf haba. I'm going to send your way either on Wednesday, the coming Wednesday, or on Sunday. And this that you wrote, I can do without the butter as well. Says Rabbi Yitzchak, I too know this. I know you can get away without it. But this too is actually an aspect of your downtroddenness, of your melancholy, and of your low state of mind. And this is actually forbidden. We are obligated. We are required to distance ourselves from these. As I've written extensively to you earlier in the same letter. It is true, one does not absolutely need to have butter, and it certainly doesn't need to indulge in it. But it is just as inappropriate to go ahead and just dismiss it with this general depressive kind of apathy, like, who cares? I just appreciate this so much, and I find it so striking, because in Chabad, there's so much emphasis, and we're raised so with such an immersion in the value of not being attached to amenities in life that are kind of just extra and indulgent and not necessary. This is a theme that's emphasized over and over throughout our training in yeshiva, etc., etc. And here we see the Frierdiker Rebbe create such a subtle but poignant distinction. Sure, don't be attached to the butter. Sure, no need to indulge in it. But when you're just in a state of depression and apathy and melancholy and downness and disconnection, and so as a result of your mood, you're just like, who cares? I don't need the butter. No, that's actually inappropriate. That's actually inappropriate. You do need the butter. You do want the butter. Be honest. If you were in a better state of mind, you would appreciate it, right? So welcome it. Don't be attached to it, but don't also pretend like you're detached from it when in fact you're really just detached from yourself. You're really just in a downtrodden, melancholy, disconnected mood. So that's, I think, really the distinction. Are you detached from the butter, or are you detached from yourself? If you're detached from the butter, that's great. So then you either get the butter or you don't get the butter, and it's not such a big deal. Either way, you're fine. Equanimity. But if you're detached from yourself, that's a whole nother beast. And that's something that has to be targeted and completely eliminated and never, ever welcomed or considered acceptable. And certainly not to disguise that in righteous or virtuous looking disguises, like being detached from physicality or from the pleasures of life. There's a difference between being detached from the pleasures of life and from needing them to being detached from the self. I wish you all the most beautiful Pesach ever. A Pesach of freedom, a Pesach that's rooted in the deepest detachment from need of the pleasures and the lusts and the drives and the desires of the body, but yet at the same time, a Pesach that's rooted in the freedom of being so closely connected and in love with who you are as a divine expression and with every living being. Have a beautiful Yom Tov. I love you all.